I've spoken to a lot of you guys throughout the day, so you're probably just going to hear a lot of what I've already said. But so I'm Steve Dickson, I'm a new program manager with the Academy. The BBC Academy has decided in its wisdom to start a centre of excellence in software engineering. As many of you know, BBC has got a great reputation in broadcasting engineering, and so the idea is that because of the bleed over between broadcasting engineering and software engineering today, that we need to elevate the status of the software engineers at the BBC, but BBC being a public service now, we also want to reach out to the general software community and help the general software community get better as well. So the BBC would like to pioneer our efforts and also work with universities and the software community in general to become, a better, to foster better software development. My background is I'm software development manager and a software developer before that. I'm working in a training organisation, so it's sort of weird for me. But I've always worked as a development manager with the training organisations to help me create a transformation in my previous organisations, such as Xerox, and I worked in media industries, and I worked in defence and automation and control systems. So I know that the training organisation has its value. So I'm sitting on this side of the fence at the moment, looking at the development organisation in the BBC and the development community in general, and coming up with strategies to foster them best practices. I'm also a great proponent of agile software developments, and specifically test-driven developments and behaviour-driven development that we've been talking about here just recently. So I'm reaching out to foster them, that mindset, that paradigm shift that developers need to be great developers. I'm reaching out and making sure that all BBC developers follow that line. It's kind of interesting because I've been looking at other groups outside the development stream and how many people actually do work in software. And there's a tremendous amount of guys like go into research or come from like the web developer community who don't have any rigor in their background and discipline. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to encompass them and bring them guys in to the fold as well, and follow the same patterns that the development community is embracing. Typically, like a typical research organisation, for example, brings in a bunch of masters and PhD folks from Europe with numerous degrees in math and chemistry, biology, physics, engineering, but not necessarily computer science. So these guys come in, given a research project to work on, indelibly it's some kind of software that's running it and they're writing programs. Chances of that software being well written and well maintainable and easily passed over to the next guy to support is pretty difficult to achieve. And usually it's a great piece of technology that they've developed, but it's a very fragile piece of technology that they've developed. So my real push here then is to embrace them other folks as well and bring them into the fold, and working with universities, much like you were talking about before, to help them foster these best practices as well in their student bodies. So when we bring graduates in, they've already been indoctrinated in these techniques. So it was actually great to hear that we've got a university that are actually pioneering this. So I think I want to talk to you more. So, we're setting up a standard in education at the BBC as well. So we're developing a BBC Masters programme, and so that BBC Masters programme will embrace the core essence of what,
good name.
the core essence of the values that we're trying to instill in the software community, and also be a badge of excellence. So people will recognise it, that the folks with the BBC Masters degree will be pretty darn good developers. So, any questions?
Is that in conjunction with anybody?
I'm working with Bournemouth and Bradford University at the moment. They're pioneering it with us.
So what is different about what you're doing in the BBC? So you work with
We don't have
organisations.
anything like this in the BBC.
Yeah, but you know, we all know what software training is or can be like. I mean, tell us about some of the things that you do.
Some of the things that I do, or the BBC does.
What the BBC Academy does.
Okay, well the BBC Academy is like the training organisation within the BBC.
That's a leading question, by the way, because I know about some of the stuff that Jason's done.
Sure, that's right, absolutely. Jason and quite a few consultants who are working with us provide best practices and training for our folks. At the core of the academy, of course, is broadcasting engineering. We've got a tremendous facility out at Wood Norton that trains the world's broadcast engineers. Not many people outside the BBC know this, but just about every organisation, broadcasting organisation around the world sends their folks to the BBC to get trained. So the BBC, as I said, is cognizant of that and doesn't want to lose that edge, that ground. So we want the software engineering community to mimic it, and that's where I come on board to help dovetail the two technologies together.
So Steve, I mean, I've been working with you guys and with the BBC for about 4 years now. I know there are people in the room who work with the BBC as well. One thing I have sort of seen working with different teams within Future Media is when they're hiring, which they're doing at the moment, it is really, really hard. And I think some of the other employers will have this experience as well. It is really, really hard to find good software developers.
Absolutely.
And the whether they have a computer science degree or not seems to be no indicator of whether or not they'll be a good software developer. So I can't help feeling from our end, from the practice end, that something's going badly wrong in higher and further education with software development. Because
I'm sure a lot of it's to do with supply and demand.
Yeah.
And the demand is far outstripping the supply of good candidates. But sounds like Chris has got his act together. His organisation.
Well, that all depends on how good the guys are that are coming out. I mean, I absolutely applaud what they're doing. I think it's fantastic. But you've still got to actually see that it actually proves that the candidates are coming out better, because I have to just mirror.
I think the point the gentleman made at the back bit there before was that dovetailing your efforts into like a science park kind of environment, so you're actually under real pressures that most of us are under outside the academia world, then that will really certainly put you in a better state.
Is there a nationally agreed skill set that everybody would recognise as that's what makes good software development? I mean, is there something you can look at where you could literally say, these are the key essential skills and this is how you mark them?
if you can forget national, if you can find me 2 professional software who agree on what that is, then I applaud you. I am actually the world's greatest software developer. I gave myself this title a few years ago, and I've gone unchallenged because in order to challenge me, we have to agree upon what that means, and we can't. That's one of the problems. There is a kind of a convergence within, for example, agile software development. There's a convergence on certain skill sets,
Yes.
but even within agile, people quite violently disagree on the best way to do things. So that's one of the problems we have, is that if you ask 2 different software developers, is this person good or bad, you may get 2 different answers.
But I think the model for that disagreement seems to be setting up competing certification schemes.
I think part of it's also about where you're from. So for Google, for instance, we have a very particular set of skills that we need. Whereas other companies, if you're doing embedded software, you probably would look at a lot of the stuff we do and go, no. If you're building control software for the space shuttle, the tolerances that people who do pacemakers have, you'd think there's appallingly low. Whereas if you're building websites, you'd look at the whole, we're going to spend 3 years proving that this is correct, and you'd think that was crazy. And I think that's part of the problem, trying to pretend there's one industry.
There is one industry, but there was, I mean, the way it's gone, certainly over the last 10 years, is that kind of enterprise software, which is quite generic. It is not necessarily so much the stuff that Google are doing, but it is the sort of thing that most people are doing. Almost every organisation now has an IT department, they need websites, they need stuff like this. And there is a common theme across this kind of stuff. It's kind of mid-level enterprise software, and there is, from my experience, we can disagree a lot on what we want, but we can agree a lot on what's not there. which is people that are particularly capable in that, because I think a lot of the degrees are either about very, very low level computational stuff, or they're still teaching people waterfall underneath it, and there's no, not necessarily vocational, but any of the stuff that we really need in that.
I'm someone who's worked in aerospace, so I know the value of waterfall when you're working in an organisation where the requirements are fixed for like years.
Yeah.
So there is rigour that has to occur in them.
But that's actually becoming more of a minority of what it was. Now maybe that is appropriate a lot more for maybe the industrial IT that we needed 20 or 30 years ago and still goes on, but the real explosion in software these days is around the enterprisey application stuff, and I don't think any of the the computer sciences degrees are particularly caught up with it, and I think that's where the stuff that Chris is doing is really, really standing out as the things that I'd really like to see more of.
Yeah, we looked into this about a year ago, looking at our mark scheme, and of course we kind of need to be able to identify what is the ideal software developer, and that's who gets 100%, and we kind of work out from there. And yeah, it was a long discussion. Internally we couldn't agree, like you say, and asked various people in industry if they'd like to input for us on what these characteristics were, and I think we ended up with somewhere around 20 to 30 different categories, and then within those all various different skills, and actually very few of them being specific to software development.
Yeah.
Not particularly focused on technical skills, a lot more about problem solving, interpersonal skills, business skills. But yeah, still an open question.
Well, I think there's an issue with the curricula in the degrees, but I still come back to the conversation we were having earlier about attracting the brightest people to go and do those degrees. Because, I mean, in our recruitment, we'll end up recruiting the vast majority of people that come in to do engineering, we recruit from other disciplines and we train them. And I would much rather get somebody who's really, really bright, who's done maths or physics or classics, and train them, than somebody who isn't but went off and did a computer science degree.
Classicists, surprisingly.
And I think our task is to get the brightest kids going into computer science, because the ideal would be a really bright kid who then does computer science at university and has a good curriculum
But
as
how
well.
much does it really matter though? Because you say like you don't necessarily. I mean, it may be nice, but actually for myself as well, some of our best developers did not do computer sciences, and it doesn't actually matter that much, which I think just means it's a bit of a shame that there's all this structure around.
Well, it could matter a lot more if we got the degrees right.
Well, if the degrees were actually relevant to the jobs they were going into, and I think that's
the reason it matters is that the people we're talking about, the good people from other disciplines, they're in short supply as well.
Yes.
Yeah, and you only get interested in that stuff even if you are doing another discipline. Speaking from experience, the only reason you get interested in that is because something really kind of turns you on about working, about programming or about developing at some point.
And that's the thing that is more difficult to define around what is a good programmer and what do we look for. It's all around this kind of passion and interest, and not just kind of to a degree technical skills that actually you can teach and pick up. If you've got the right mindset and you're passionate and you're interested and you genuinely want to tackle these problems, and you can see the value of helping businesses and helping communities kind of solve these problems through software, then you can teach the rest of it in a way.
But you've got to have that passion, right?
Yeah.
If we systematically taught kids in school that computers are boring, that's not a good message.
Who says that? Have you looked at Richard Gabriel's work he did a course, the MFA in software?
No.
Basically, he was trying to say, could we teach people software as if it was a fine art? Actually, you'll probably find his name is Dick Gabriel and all those things.
Yeah.
But that also comes back to the Nestor report you were talking about earlier, because I thought one of the really interesting things that Ian Livingston proposed in that report is to set up a UTC that specialises in arts and computing, and brings it to University Technical College. So it's a sort of secondary school environment which focuses on both art and computing in the same place and teaches them together. And I think that would be brilliant if we could do that.
Tony?
You are making it quite hard for education to sell this vision of great software development if you can't agree between yourselves what great software development
I can tell you what great software development is. As a manager, I can tell you I've managed large teams of developers, so I know what great software development is.
That doesn't help if he doesn't agree with your definition.
No, I'm not talking about a subjective definition. I'm talking about the proof of the pudding is in the baking, right? If you can see a large component of code that's been well designed, it's easily maintainable, that's easily portable, that any developer can come along and pick it up, then that's proof of the pudding, isn't it?
There is some truth there, Tony. I mean, I tend to be, I err on the side of empiricism in software. So even though I am emotionally very drawn to talk of aesthetics and software as an art, and I certainly agree with the idea of software as a craft, when it comes to particularly talking with this stuff with other people, I try to, as much as possible, stick to the stuff that we understand to be true because the numbers tell us that it's true. So in terms of if you like the underlying physics of code, what is maintainable code, what is reliable code, what is complexity, I tend to own that, and I agree with Steve that when you come down to the nuts and bolts of it, there are things that for which the jury is no longer out. There are things that we understand very well. The fact that 90% of us choose still not to pay any attention to them is a different issue, but that's probably true in any profession. But there is a body of knowledge. We may disagree on whether we call this engineering or whether we call it an art. We may disagree on a lot of things, but there is a growing body of evidence for things that we know tend to work and things that we know tend not to work. But when it comes to hiring programmers, I'm still at the stage where I kind of know them when I see it. I know it when I see it. And it's a horrible thing to say, but I'd rather pair with them and sit and do a problem with them for 10 minutes and I will just know. But but you're right, there may be 9 other people who will know different. I've watched programmers being hired and thought, really? And they've glowed about it and thought they're brilliant, and people have had their own idea. I met a German programmer, nothing to do with German programmers, but I met a German programmer at a conference last year in Nuremberg, and he was gushing about this new guy, this Russian they hired. And he said he's such a brilliant software engineer, that nobody can understand his code.
But there you've got the example of an idiot making a bad hiring decision. And idiots do make bad hiring decisions, right? I mean,
but they probably said that about Turing, didn't they?
but my experience is when we hire, we very seldom have anything other than unanimity amongst people with quite a broad range of backgrounds going in and spending half-hour slots with a potential recruit. It's almost always unanimous. People know it when they see it.
So have you looked at SWEPOC, the Software Engineering Body of Knowledge project? So it's a whole bunch of, now I'm being recorded, a bunch of luminaries. A bunch of luminaries gathered together to come up with what they felt is going to be the canonical body of knowledge, everything you need to know about software engineering. Oh, CBAT.
CMAT's the new one, the science, so yeah.
And those luminaries gathered something, and unfortunately what they've done looks like, do you know Nasruddin, the Iranian story? And so it's a classic Nasruddin mistake where his neighbor finds him looking for his keys, and they ask, why are you looking, and they scrabble through the dirt, they can't find it, and they say, why are you looking here? I was like, well, there's light here, but I lost my keys over there. Yeah. And a lot of the problem is that we measure the stuff that's easy to measure, not the stuff that's important, because it's hard to measure.
Should we have computer science degrees? I mean, given that several people have said actually the classicists make the best software developers, from at least a career point of view, should we have computer science degrees?
Absolutely, I think we do. But I think they've just become very confused about the focus, about what they're about, and I think it's very hard for people going into it to know.
Because if you were starting from scratch, how would you make a reasonable computer science degree? Given that really in a computer science,
you wouldn't call it computer science, that's just too vague. It's just far too vague.
Okay. Well, software development then.
Yeah, well that's
Let's
there
if we
aren't
had a
any
degree
software
in software
development
development.
degrees. There aren't.
How do we do that?
Well, I mean,
because there aren't any practicing software developers who want to go back to college and teach people.
Well, maybe there will be. I mean, but the thing is, there's just not even the thought that there is a software development degree. There aren't. There's always something completely different. But the things like you're talking about,
I don't agree with that.
My degree is going to be software engineering and internet engineering.
Yeah, well, that's it's not just computer science.
There is quite a large number of degrees in the UK that is called computer science, but that is in fact software engineering. At our university, our degree, even though it's called computer science, is essentially a software development degree.
But then, I mean, doesn't that make it hard because it's called computer science for people who are, looking for degrees to actually know?
Yeah, it is, and that is
software development.
That is historic, and there is a trend at the moment all over the place to have more specifically named degrees, especially because the discipline's getting so large that you can't teach all of it in 3 years. But at many universities, the main focus is on software engineering and software development. Certainly at our department it is, and we're not by no means unique.
So the difference between teaching theory and teaching practice, isn't there? So computer science for me is all about theory and advancing the state of the science, as it were. Maybe the linguistics of programming languages or that kind of thing, or newer and more efficient algorithms. But you don't. But we talked about this earlier. You don't teach that. What you teach is how to program in the first couple of years and things similar to that. So what I'm thinking is maybe there's a way of allowing practitioners to come in and teach that to people rather than having lecturers have to teach that, and having lecturers teach the stuff that the practitioners wish they would teach, which is the background, broadening their horizons, and then giving them over to the practitioners, a little bit like what Chris is doing, to actually teach how to program. Because I think I as an employer, I generally speaking couldn't care less about if they had a degree or not in computer science or not. I was more interested in a classicist, like you said, but someone who had spent a lot of time working with people and trying to learn was the best person for me, and trying to broaden their horizons. A broad horizoned individual was a much better hire than someone who had sort of slavishly ticked all the boxes for how to do things. So maybe the universities are good at teaching theory, and maybe as a practitioner, I disagree with what you said, because I would like to go back and teach students how to program. I don't really have an entry point for that yet. I would like to know how to do that, and I think there's a wall there where I don't understand university education. I would like to. I've been through it, but I don't understand it, and I'd like to know how to help. But maybe I can teach practice, which I know I can teach, and maybe universities can teach the theory.
Well,
maybe there's a partnership.
So Alan's idea, and we sort of looked back at Ray Bradbury's work at University of Anglia.
He wrote Fahrenheit 451.
Yes, that's the guy there, yes. Basically, they started a creative writing course at the University of Anglia 4 decades ago, and basically they sort of realized that English literature as a teaching mechanism had ossified. It became something that wasn't actually productive. It wasn't generating people who could write. It could generate people who could read stuff and tell you about it, but it couldn't generate new stuff. And maybe what we do is we take computer science, we break it into pieces, and we actually make a writing software course. And then all creative programs. Yes, we have a course for people who want to just learn how to write software.
And they come in and they have a computational thinking course.
Yes, and then exactly, and that gets woven into all the other courses, so that you come out of university, and university says you can read, you can write, you can understand computational thinking. And then for the people who want to be professional software writers, there's a course for them.
But the difficulty is getting the staff for that. That's what I keep coming back to. How do you get the people who have the practical experience? Because I don't, this is not to insult university lecturers, but if you are in that environment, you haven't had the time to have the experience of doing software development in very large teams, for example, which you necessarily get in let's say a large company, and to have some sort of conveyor belt for getting that experience back into the education process would be how can we invent that?
I think we could recreate the Polytechnic. The Polytechnic, we could set that. That was all the thinking behind Polytechnics. How do you break down the gap between the academic and the practitioner? You have practitioners working part-time in university-like environments where they convey the shop floor skills directly to the students without going through the minds of the academics. And then they have Polytechnics who immediately got themselves pay rises and were having to become universities and lost touch with the roots. So perhaps you need to go through that cycle again and get real practitioners into the teaching environment.
But you need to make it a high status thing. I mean, part of the problem with the Polytechnics is that it weren't seen as a high status education.
How do you keep the status? Yeah.
Whereas if you are a professional writer going back to university, to help teach, that's an incredibly high status thing. And for the students, having a professional come in to help teach them was incredibly valuable and seen as like it was a treat. Stephen King pops into your school.
We're gonna have to break again. I'm so sorry because
Sorry, it stimulated all that debate.
We're going to take a comfort break for 10 minutes. Before we do, another question that I'm hoping we would ask, so I'm going to ask the question now, which is why degrees at all for this? Should we be looking at, now given the way things are going with education, should we really be looking much harder at apprenticeships for people 18 plus, for software developers? Is this something people should learn on the job? So 10 minutes folks, and then back.